In the final, brutal months of World War II, a new silhouette began to haunt the battlefields of Europe. It was a machine that didn't fit the familiar profiles of Allied armor German soldiers had grown accustomed to. This video examines the story of a specific American tank that, in its limited but potent appearances, created a powerful psychological impact on German forces, forcing localized retreats and challenging the dominance of their famed heavy panzers. The topic is highly relevant to understanding the technological arms race that defined the latter stages of the war. For enthusiasts of military history, it reveals how a single piece of hardware can shift battlefield dynamics not just through firepower, but through reputation and fear. It demonstrates the critical interplay between engineering, strategy, and the morale of soldiers who had to face these new steel beasts on the front lines, creating a compelling chapter in military history. Throughout this analysis, we will explore the circumstances that led to this tank's creation, examining the crisis in American armor doctrine that necessitated its development. We will cover its technical specifications, its combat debut through the famous Zebra mission, and analyze specific, documented engagements where its presence was decisive. We will also address the myths and the realities of its overall strategic impact on the war, ensuring a balanced and factual perspective. This channel is dedicated to presenting well-researched historical narratives. Our work is based on cross-referencing official military records, established historical texts, and first-hand accounts from veterans on both sides of the conflict. We aim to provide a clear, factual account that honors the complexity of the events and the experiences of those who lived through them, avoiding sensationalism in favor of historical accuracy and detailed examination of the facts. This new machine was not born in a vacuum. Its existence was a direct response to a deadly problem facing Allied forces. American tank crews were fighting with courage and skill, but their primary vehicle, the M4 Sherman, was struggling against the latest generation of German armor. To understand the legend of the new tank, one must first grasp the grim reality American tankers faced in the fields of France and Germany. By mid-1944, following the D-Day landings, the Allies had achieved air supremacy, but on the ground, a severe challenge emerged. The German Wehrmacht had widely deployed its new generation of tanks, the Panther and the Tiger. These vehicles boasted powerful high-velocity cannons and thick, sloped frontal armor that proved incredibly difficult for the standard Allied tanks to penetrate, creating a significant disparity in armored warfare capabilities on the European front. The workhorse of the U.S. Army was the M4 Sherman. While it was a reliable, mechanically sound vehicle produced in vast numbers, its 75mm main gun and relatively thin armor were outmatched in one-on-one engagements with these German heavyweights. American tankers had to rely on superior numbers, flanking maneuvers, and support from artillery and aircraft to overcome this technological gap, often at a great cost in both machines and experienced crews. Different perspectives existed within the Allied command regarding this issue. Some, like General Leslie J. McNair of Army Ground Forces, believed the existing doctrine was sound, emphasizing mobility and mass over individual tank superiority. Others, particularly commanders and crews on the front lines, urgently called for a vehicle that could meet the German Panthers and Tigers on equal terms, arguing that the current tactical solutions were unsustainable and resulted in unnecessarily high casualties. Imagine a boxing match where one fighter has a significantly longer reach and tougher defenses. The Sherman was like the more agile but less powerful boxer, forced to get in close and land multiple blows to have an effect, all while risking a single knockout punch from its opponent. This analogy helps illustrate the tactical disadvantage American crews faced every time they rolled into a potential engagement with superior German armor during this phase of World War II. This doctrinal debate and technological imbalance created an urgent need for a solution. The answer was not simply to upgrade the Sherman, but to introduce an entirely new class of vehicle. The development of this new tank, however, was a long and controversial process, one that revealed deep divisions within the U.S. Army's own leadership about the very purpose of a tank on the modern battlefield. The core of the American armored issue stemmed from its guiding philosophy, the tank destroyer doctrine. This doctrine stipulated that the primary role of tanks like the Sherman was to support infantry and exploit breakthroughs. The task of engaging and destroying enemy tanks was officially assigned to a separate branch of specialized, lightly armored but heavily armed vehicles called tank destroyers, such as the M10 and M36. This separation of roles looked effective on paper but often failed in the chaotic reality of combat. German armored assaults rarely waited for tank destroyer units to be in position. Consequently, the M4 Sherman crews were frequently forced into the tank-killing role for which their vehicles were not optimally designed. This doctrinal rigidity was a major contributing factor to the high loss rates experienced by American armored units in the European theater. Perspectives on this doctrine were sharply divided. Proponents in the high command argued it promoted combined arms tactics and prevented a costly arms race for ever heavier tanks, focusing instead on mass production and logistics. Opponents, primarily armored force officers like General Jacob L. Devers, contended that the best weapon to defeat a tank is another better tank, and that failing to develop one put American soldiers at a severe disadvantage. The situation was akin to having a police force where patrol officers are deliberately not given the heavy weapons needed to stop a major threat, instead being told to call in a separate SWAT team. While logical in theory, it is impractical when the threat is immediate and overwhelming. The Sherman crews were the patrol officers facing down heavily armed opponents, waiting for specialized support that might not arrive in time. The mounting pressure from the front lines and the undeniable success of German heavy tanks eventually forced a change. The fierce internal debates and the grim casualty reports from Europe finally cleared the path for a project that had been slow-walked for years. This project aimed to create a true American heavy tank, a machine designed from the ground up to hunt and destroy the most powerful panzers. The development of what would become the M26 Pershing was a protracted and difficult journey, beginning as early as 1942. Initially designated the T-20, the program went through numerous iterations, including the T-23, T-25, and finally the T-26. These prototypes experimented with different transmissions, engines, and armaments, but the project consistently lacked the urgency and priority given to the mass-produced M4 Sherman, a decision that would later be heavily criticized. A significant hurdle was the internal resistance from Army Ground Forces Command, which remained committed to the tank destroyer doctrine. They viewed a heavy tank as a white elephant, too slow, too heavy for strategic mobility, and a drain on logistical resources. This bureaucratic inertia meant that while Germany was fielding Tigers in 1942, a comparable American tank was still languishing on the drawing board and in limited prototype testing stages. The perspective of the Ordnance Department, the branch responsible for designing weapons, was one of frustration. They had developed viable heavy tank prototypes but could not get them approved for mass production and deployment. They saw the technological writing on the wall, understanding that the Sherman's advantages would eventually be nullified by German upgrades. But their recommendations were repeatedly overruled by higher command echelons who controlled procurement and doctrine for the U.S. Army. This development process can be compared to a company that has a revolutionary new product designed by its engineers, but the board of directors refuses to fund its production, preferring to stick with their older, established bestseller. The engineers can see the market shifting and know their old product will soon be obsolete, but their hands are tied until the leadership acknowledges the crisis and finally approves the new design. Finally, in late 1944, with Allied armored losses mounting in the wake of the Normandy campaign and the Battle of the Bulge looming, the opposition crumbled. The T-26E3 prototype was rushed into limited production and officially designated the M26 Pershing. The crisis had become too severe to ignore, and the new tank was finally on its way to the front, carrying the hopes of embattled American crews. The M26 Pershing represented a monumental leap forward in American tank design. shifting from a philosophy of mobility to one of balanced firepower and protection. Its most significant feature was the powerful high-velocity 90mm M3 gun. This weapon was derived from a successful anti-aircraft cannon and was capable of penetrating the frontal armor of both the Panther and Tiger I tanks at standard combat ranges, a feat the Sherman 75mm gun could not reliably achieve. Protection was also drastically improved. The Pershing featured a thick, well-sloped cast turret and hull, with up to 102 millimeters of frontal armor. This was a significant increase over the M4 Sherman and put it on a much more equal footing with its German adversaries. For the first time, an American tank crew could feel reasonably confident that their vehicle might withstand a direct hit from a German 88mm or 75mm cannon and survive to return fire. From a mobility standpoint, the Pershing utilized a torsion bar suspension system, a feature common on German tanks but new for the Americans. This provided a more stable ride and better cross-country performance compared to the Sherman's vertical volute spring suspension. However, it was somewhat underpowered for its 42-ton weight, using a slightly upgraded version of the same Ford Gaffe V8 found in the much lighter late-model Shermans, which affected its acceleration and speed. Consider the Pershing as the heavyweight champion finally stepping into the ring. While the Sherman was a nimble middleweight, the Pershing was built to trade blows with the biggest opponents. It had the power in its 90mm fists and the durability in its thick steel chin to go toe-to-toe with the enemy's best, changing the entire dynamic of the fight from a frantic scramble to a calculated duel. With its formidable specifications finalized, the question was no longer about its potential, but about its performance in actual combat. The U.S. Army was not content to wait for a full-scale deployment. A special, urgent mission was devised to get a handful of these new machines into the European theater as quickly as possible to test their mettle and give American forces a much-needed edge. To expedite the combat evaluation of the new tank, the Ordnance Department initiated a top-secret program known as Mission Zebra in late 1944. The plan was to ship a small initial batch of 20 T-26E3 tanks directly from the production line to the European theater of operations. These were not to be integrated into existing units in a standard way, but were to be accompanied by a team of factory technicians and ordnance specialists. The primary goal of the mission was twofold. First, it was a combat trial to gather real-world data on the Pershing's performance against German armor, its mechanical reliability, and any necessary design adjustments. Second, it was a crucial morale booster, intended to prove to both Allied soldiers and the German army that America now possessed a tank capable of challenging the dominance of the Tiger and Panther, directly countering enemy propaganda and bolstering friendly confidence. From the perspective of the tank crews selected to operate these first Pershings, it was a mixture of excitement and apprehension. They were being handed the most powerful tank the U.S. had ever built, a machine they hoped would finally even the odds. However, they were also acting as test pilots, taking an unproven vehicle into the most dangerous combat environments imaginable. Their feedback would be critical for the future of American armored warfare. The Zebra mission was like a special forces operation for military hardware. Instead of a slow, wide-scale rollout, a small elite package was delivered directly to the hot zone for immediate impact and intelligence gathering. The team of specialists accompanying the tanks acted as the support crew, ensuring this new weapon system could be maintained and understood under the extreme pressures of the front line, maximizing its potential effectiveness from day one. The first of these tanks arrived in the port of Antwerp, Belgium in January 1945 and were assigned to the 3rd and 9th Armored Divisions. They were moving into an active combat zone during the final pushes into Germany. It would not be long before these new steel beasts would face their baptism by fire, and the rumors of their capabilities would be put to the ultimate test against their intended targets. On February 26, 1945, near the German town of Elsdorf, the M26 Pershing saw its first significant action. A Pershing from the 3rd Armored Division, commanded by Sergeant Nick Maslenik and nicknamed Fireball, was positioned in an overwatch role when it spotted a formidable opponent, a German Tiger I heavy tank. The Tiger was maneuvering to attack a nearby American roadblock, presenting a perfect opportunity for the new 90mm gun to be tested. The engagement was swift and decisive. From a range of about 900 yards, the Pershing fired, its high-velocity armor-piercing round striking the Tiger's thick frontal armor. The shell penetrated the superstructure, resulting in a catastrophic explosion that blew the German tank's turret completely off its chassis. This single shot validated the years of development and debate. The Pershing could, and did, destroy Germany's most feared tank with lethal efficiency in a frontal engagement. However, the day was not without its costs. Later, another Pershing from the same unit was ambushed by a different Tiger at close range. The Tiger fired 3 shots, 2 of which penetrated the Pershing's weaker belly and turret armor, disabling it and causing a fire. This incident served as a sobering reminder that while the Pershing was powerful, it was not invincible. It highlighted the ever-present importance of crew skill, tactics, and situational awareness on the battlefield. CTA suggestion. The intricate histories of these machines and the soldiers who crewed them are a core part of what makes the study of World War II so compelling. If you find these detailed historical accounts valuable, consider subscribing to the channel and enabling notifications. It helps us continue to research and produce content that explores these pivotal moments with the depth they deserve, ensuring these stories are not forgotten. This first series of encounters near the Roer River was just the beginning. The news of a Tiger being destroyed by a single frontal shot from a new American tank spread quickly. While one engagement does not win a war, it plants a seed of doubt in the enemy and a seed of hope in allies. Soon, another, even more famous duel would be captured on film, cementing the Pershing's reputation forever. One of the most iconic armored engagements of the entire war occurred on March 6, 1945, in the shadow of the Great Cologne Cathedral. A German Panther tank had been holding up the American advance, knocking out a Sherman and terrorizing infantry in the city streets. The crew of a 3rd Armored Division M26 Pershing, commanded by Sergeant Robert Early, was tasked with eliminating the threat, and the entire event was captured by a U.S. Army Signal Corps cameraman. The resulting footage is a tense and dramatic sequence. The Pershing cautiously advances to an intersection, its gunner, Clarence Smoyer, peering down the street. The Panther is partially hidden, waiting in ambush. As the Pershing edges forward, the Panther's turret begins to traverse toward it. In that critical moment, the American crew's training and the Pershing's superior turret traverse speed paid off, allowing them to fire first at the exposed enemy. The Pershing fired a total of 3 90mm rounds in quick succession. The first shot struck the Panther's side hull armor, penetrating and causing an immediate fire. The next 2 shots ensured its complete destruction. The film captures the German crew bailing out of the burning tank as it is consumed by flames. This public filmed victory against one of Germany's best tanks provided undeniable proof of the Pershing's capabilities and became a legendary piece of wartime footage. This engagement was like a gunslinger duel in the Old West, but with 40-ton steel chargers. It was a test of nerve, speed, and accuracy. The Pershing crew's quick reaction and the tank's technical advantages allowed them to draw faster and land the fatal shot. The fact that it was recorded for the world to see transformed it from a simple combat report into a powerful symbol of shifting technological tides on the battlefield. The duel at Cologne became the Pershing's defining moment. It was a clear, unambiguous victory that resonated far beyond the tactical situation in that one city. For the German army, it was visual evidence of a new threat. For the Allies, it was a massive morale boost. The whispers about the new Wonder Tank were now backed by undeniable, dramatic proof, which began to shape how the enemy perceived American armored forces. For German Panzer crews who had enjoyed technological superiority for much of the war, the appearance of the M26 Pershing was an unwelcome and unsettling development. Intelligence reports and after-action accounts from the Wehrmacht began to describe a new American tank with a long gun and a low, wide profile, similar in appearance to their own Panther. Initial encounters confirmed their fears. This tank's armor could resist their shots, and its cannon could easily defeat theirs. The psychological impact was significant. A German veteran of the 116th Panzer Division later recounted the shock of seeing a Panther destroyed frontally by a Pershing, stating it was the first time they had encountered an American tank that could truly stand up to them. This created uncertainty and hesitation. Tank commanders could no longer assume an inherent advantage when facing American armor, forcing them to be more cautious and less aggressive in their tactics. This new threat was often exaggerated in frontline rumors, which is common in warfare. German soldiers, already facing overwhelming Allied numerical and air superiority, now had to contend with a ground weapon that matched their best machines. This contributed to a decline in morale among armored units on the Western Front during the final months of the war, as the feeling of technological invincibility that had once bolstered them was now shattered. Imagine being the reigning champion, used to winning every match, and suddenly a new challenger appears who is just as strong and tough as you are. All your old strategies and the confidence that came with them are instantly called into question. This is what German Panzer crews experienced. The M26 Pershing wasn't just a new tank, it was a direct challenge to their identity as the masters of armored warfare. The German High Command was aware of the Pershing, but at this late stage of the war, there was little they could do. Production of their own heavy tanks was being crippled by bombing, and fuel shortages were rampant. The Pershing's arrival was another critical problem on a long list of insurmountable challenges. Its presence, though limited, directly influenced German tactical decisions, sometimes leading units to avoid engagement or even retreat when a Pershing was identified. The impact of the M26 Pershing extended beyond its physical capabilities. It became a potent weapon of psychological warfare. The mere possibility of a Pershing being in the area could alter the behavior of an opposing German commander. The risk of losing a valuable Tiger or Panther in an equal fight was too great, especially when resources were so scarce. This led to tactical withdrawals and a general reluctance to engage American armored columns head-on. This effect is known as presence deterrence. A weapon system can be so formidable that its reputation alone deters an enemy from taking certain actions. While only a few hundred Pershings saw combat in World War II, their effectiveness in early engagements created an outsized reputation. German units, hearing reports of the new supertank, might retreat from a position they would have otherwise defended against a force composed solely of Shermans. The American forces capitalized on this. The sight of a Pershing leading a column of Shermans provided a huge morale boost to U.S. troops, instilling confidence that they could handle anything the Germans threw at them. For the infantry, knowing they had a heavy hitter on their side that could eliminate enemy pillboxes and tanks with ease made them more aggressive and willing to advance, further pressuring the already strained German defenses. This is the battlefield equivalent of a queen on the chessboard. While you may have many pawns, Shermans, the presence of the powerful queen, Pershing, fundamentally changes the geometry of the game. Your opponent must constantly account for its location and power, restricting their moves and forcing them onto the defensive. The Pershing's presence limited the Germans' tactical options and gave the Americans greater freedom of maneuver and a renewed offensive spirit. Therefore, the statement that this one tank made the German army retreat holds a measure of truth, not on a strategic, war-wide scale, but on a localized, tactical level. Its psychological shadow was longer than its actual numbers would suggest. In specific sectors and battles, the confirmed or even rumored presence of an M26 Pershing was enough to convince German commanders to pull back, preserving their forces for a fight they felt they had a better chance of winning. While the M26 Pershing was a formidable tank, it is crucial to maintain a balanced perspective and acknowledge its limitations and the myths surrounding it. It was not a magical war-winning weapon. The Pershing arrived very late in the war, in February 1945, when Germany was already on the verge of collapse. Its contribution, while significant in specific battles, was not strategically decisive in the final outcome of the conflict. The tank also suffered from mechanical issues, which is common for any new piece of military hardware rushed into service. Its V8 engine, borrowed from the Sherman, was strained by the Pershing's heavier weight, making it relatively slow and sometimes unreliable. The fan belts for the engine cooling system were a particular weak point and could fail unexpectedly, disabling the tank. These teething problems were addressed in post-war models, but were a real concern for its wartime crews. Furthermore, the number of Pershings that saw combat was very small. Only about 310 were deployed to the European theater before the war ended, and of those, only a fraction engaged in significant combat. In contrast, over 49,000 Sherman tanks were produced. The vast majority of armored combat for the U.S. Army in World War II was fought and won by the M4 Sherman and the M36 tank destroyer, not the Pershing. It's important to view the Pershing as a necessary and effective late-game addition rather than the primary hero of the story. It was the right tool that arrived at the right time to solve a specific problem, but it stood on the shoulders of the thousands of other armored vehicles and crews that had fought for years. To credit the Pershing with winning the war would be an overstatement that disrespects the enormous contributions of others. The true story of the Pershing is one of potential and transition. It was a glimpse of the future of American tank design and a necessary response to a battlefield crisis. Its performance demonstrated the validity of a balanced heavy tank concept, but its legacy is more about the lessons it taught and the post-war tanks it inspired than about its own limited impact on the final victory in Europe. The end of World War II did not mark the end of the M26 Pershing story. Its most significant and lasting impact was its role as a direct forerunner to the next generation of American armor. The lessons learned from its design and combat performance in Europe and later in the Korean War provided the foundation for the entire M46, M47, and M48 patent series of main battle tanks, which would become the backbone of U.S. and NATO armored forces for decades. In the immediate post-war period, the M26 was reclassified from a heavy tank to a medium tank, reflecting a shift in U.S. Army doctrine. The old rigid distinctions between tank roles were abandoned in favor of the more flexible main battle tank concept, a vehicle that could do it all. The Pershing, with its balance of firepower, mobility, and protection, was the perfect template for this new philosophy, representing a major turning point. The Pershing itself would see significant combat again, this time in the Korean War. There, it proved highly effective against the Soviet-supplied T-34/85 tanks used by the North Korean Army. Although by then it was beginning to show its age and mechanical limitations, it once again demonstrated the value of a powerful, well-protected tank on the battlefield, validating the design choices made years earlier and solidifying its place in military history. Its legacy can be seen as that of a trailblazer. Like the first person to climb a difficult mountain, their achievement is not just the summit itself, but the route they established for all who follow. The Pershing established the design route for American main battle tanks throughout the Cold War. Key features, from the 90mm gun concept to the robust suspension, were refined and carried forward in its successful successors. Ultimately, the M26 Pershing serves as a crucial bridge between the mass-produced expediency of the M4 Sherman and the technological sophistication of the Cold War-era Patton and Abrams tanks. It was a machine born of necessity, forged in bureaucratic debate, and proven in the final, fiery battles of the world's greatest conflict. Its story is a testament to adaptation and the relentless evolution of military technology under the pressures of war. The late but impactful arrival of the M26 Pershing had a profound, if unseen, influence on post-war American military strategy. The difficulties in getting the tank approved and deployed served as a powerful case study in the dangers of doctrinal rigidity. Military planners learned that they could not afford to be caught off guard by an enemy's technological leap. This led to a more proactive approach to research and development during the Cold War. The late but impactful arrival of the M26 Pershing had a profound, if unseen, influence on post-war American military strategy. The difficulties in getting the tank approved and deployed served as a powerful case study in the dangers of doctrinal rigidity. Military planners learned that they could not afford to be caught off guard by an enemy's technological leap. This led to a more proactive approach to research and development during the Cold War. This experience directly shaped the philosophy of maintaining a qualitative edge over potential adversaries, primarily the Soviet Union. The memory of Shermans being outmatched by Panthers and Tigers fueled a determination to ensure that American soldiers would never again be sent into battle with technologically inferior equipment. The Pershing's success, however limited, proved that superior technology could save lives and provide a decisive tactical advantage against a numerically superior foe. Furthermore, the Pershing's role influenced the structure of American armored divisions. The main battle tank concept, which it helped pioneer, streamlined logistics and training. Instead of managing multiple types of specialized vehicles like medium tanks and tank destroyers, the Army could focus on a single, versatile platform. This strategic simplification made U.S. armored forces more flexible, powerful, and easier to deploy, a critical advantage in the fast-paced scenarios envisioned during the Cold War. Think of it as a lesson learned the hard way. The U.S. military nearly failed a critical test in World War II due to its armored doctrine. The Pershing was the last-minute cram session that allowed them to pass. After the war, military leaders were determined to study constantly, ensuring they would be more than prepared for the next, even more daunting examination against the Warsaw Pact, a commitment that led to continuous tank development. This strategic shift is perhaps the Pershing's most important yet least visible legacy. It wasn't just a tank, it was a catalyst for change. It forced a fundamental re-evaluation of how America prepares for war, emphasizing technological superiority and doctrinal flexibility. This mindset, born from the struggle to field the M26, would go on to define American military power for the remainder of the 20th century and beyond. In summarizing the story of the M26 Pershing, it is vital to be realistic about its role. It was an excellent tank that decisively won the engagements it fought. However, it was a late arrival to a war that was already being won by overwhelming industrial might, superior logistics, and the courage of millions of soldiers fighting with the tools they had, like the ubiquitous M4 Sherman. The Pershing was a potent final punctuation mark, not the entire sentence. For those interested in exploring this topic further, several outstanding resources are available. Books like Spearhead by Adam Makos offer a dramatic, crew-level perspective on late-war armored combat, while R.P. Honeycutt's comprehensive technical volume, Pershing, A History of the Medium Tank T-20 series, provides unparalleled detail on the tank's development. These sources can offer a deeper understanding of the subject matter we've discussed today. The expected result of introducing a new weapon system is rarely instantaneous victory. The Pershing story shows that even a superior machine is constrained by production numbers, logistics, and the timeline of a conflict. Its true immediate impact was on the morale of its crews and the psychology of its enemies on a tactical level. It was a promise of a future where American tankers would not be outgunned, a promise fulfilled in the conflicts that followed. We've explored the complex history behind this famous tank, and we hope this balanced account has been valuable. What aspect of the Pershing story, its difficult development, its combat duels, or its strategic legacy do you find most compelling? Sharing your thoughts in the comments below can help us all gain new perspectives on this fascinating piece of military history. We genuinely appreciate hearing from our community of history enthusiasts. Ultimately, the M26 Pershing stands as a powerful symbol of adaptation under pressure. Its story is a reminder that in warfare, victory is often determined not just by the weapons you start with, but by the ability to recognize flaws, overcome internal resistance, and deploy the right solution, even in the final hour. It was a machine that provided a crucial edge when it mattered most, securing its place as a legend of World War II.